I want to tell you a story about a college student. We'll call him Johnny. Johnny wanted to earn some extra money, so he and his friends start selling drugs to other students on campus. But before long, their drug distribution ring is discovered by the police, and Johnny is arrested. This is not a small mistake by any means, but one that, years later, Johnny deeply regrets. Today, Johnny is trying to move on. He's clean, reformed, and the misdemeanor crime is about to be permanently removed from his record. The problem is, every time he applies for a job and employers search Johnny's name, the same story pops up on Google, a news article detailing his college crime. He's done the work to change his life, but the internet, or his future employers, won't let him escape his past. This is a true story of one applicant to Cleveland.com's Right to Be Forgotten experiment that began in 2018. The news site that covers Northeast Ohio began the project out of concern for some of their readers.
I am requesting that my name be removed from the January 7th.
Requests from people to take down stories about them.
I made a big mistake, owed up to it, and paid for it.
The situation has had a horrific effect on myself and my entire family.
Because they're embarrassed or it hurts their ability to get jobs.
The article below appears near the top of any search using my name and the word attorney.
These stories have come up in every job interview I've had in the last 5 years.
It has hurt my career.
Or their children are getting older and might find them.
That article is a nightmare for me.
It has caused trauma to myself and my children in our normal lives. I have 2 daughters, 11 and 14 years old.
We were the cause of some major suffering.
After Cleveland.com heard from many readers who shared the pain of having these stories follow them throughout their lives, the news site decided to do something pretty controversial in the news world. They unpublished their own news stories. Cleveland.com wasn't alone. Hundreds of news organizations all over the globe began to ask some important questions about a world where information is not just permanent, but easily accessed by anyone with an internet connection. Should people have the right to erase embarrassing parts of their digital past? Or does the public have a right to know about the minor crimes of their neighbors and future employees? When we look at this debate with an open mind, we find that we have much to learn about shame, compassion, and the difference between forgiving and forgetting. The concept of the right to be forgotten was first brought to public attention in 2014 in Spain. Mario Castella Gonzalez had petitioned the European Union's Court of Justice, the EU's highest court, to have a 1990s newspaper article about his bankruptcy removed from Google search results. He argued that the information, while once relevant, no longer reflected who he currently is. The court agreed, stating that individuals have a right to control their digital identities when information becomes outdated or irrelevant. This has since become known as the Right to Be Forgotten case. And the EU's ruling on that case has sparked debates all over the world. Advocates of the right to be forgotten argue that the internet's permanence unfairly traps people in their past, making it difficult for them to move forward, even if they have changed for the better. Critics, however, counter that
editors all across the country were getting these emails.
But there was a long-standing feeling that we're the first version of history and that these archives are sacrosanct and you would never change them.
Journalists, like as a profession, have this idea that they are the first draft of history or the public record, and you just don't mess with that.
Programs like those at Cleveland.com attempt to strike a balance. Applicants who haven't been convicted of violent crimes, felony sex crimes, child abuse, and corruption can request to have outdated or harmful articles removed from search engine results. These requests are reviewed case by case, weighing factors like the age of information and the public's need to know.
You know, this was not some elected official. This was not use of force. You know, I mean, this guy was skimming overtime.
But he didn't abuse his authority as an officer. He stole from his employer. I mean, this is like any other theft.
Yeah, but I hold him to a higher standard for being a cop in the first place.
This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This went on for like years, it looks like, right?
Yeah.
And it's only been years since this story ran. And so, I don't know, that means something to me. Like, this was an ongoing thing about what he had going. And taking the money, the extra money.
And I'm with Mark. Like, the public trust issue here, this isn't some, water department guy skimming copper off the, some job site. Like, this is a police officer stealing overtime over the course of years. I mean, that's...
I don't know. I first read this and I was like, yes, I think we should let him be forgotten. But now I'm kind of on the other side. Like, I think, because it's not a ton of money, he's not a public threat to people, but because he is in a position of trust, in a public position, taxpayer money, I think you guys are right when you're saying he should be held to a higher standard.
Each decision is full of ethical complexities. How do we decide what should be forgotten and what must remain public? Unlike humans, the internet remembers everything. The Internet Archive's Wayback Machine even remembers websites that are no longer published. Every headline, social media post, and embarrassing photo can live on indefinitely. This permanence is unnatural, argues Scott Small, an Alzheimer's researcher and author of Forgetting: The Benefits of Not Remembering. Small explains that human memory is selective for a reason. Forgetting helps us focus on what matters and let go of what doesn't. Small states that forgetting is good for our emotional well-being, for our creativity, and even for our cognition. Our ability to think clearly in a very complicated world requires that balance between memory and forgetting. But online, forgetting isn't an option. Jon Ronson, the author of So You've Been Publicly Shamed, tells the story of Justine Sacco, a woman whose single social media post, meant as a joke, went viral while she was on a plane.
A New York public relations executive is out of a job this morning. She is apologizing for what's being called the tweet heard around the world. On Friday, Justine Sacco wrote on Twitter, quote, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white."
Her words sparked global outrage before her flight to South Africa even landed. The response from her employer was also quick. Media conglomerate IAC terminated her as communications director Saturday. On Sunday, Sacco
Years later, Sacco still faced the consequences of that social media post, which had become a permanent part of her online identity. Ronson wonders if this kind of shameful punishment fits the crime. In his book, Ronson interviews a Houston judge whose job it has been for 20 years to shame criminals with his sentences. But the judge believes that the shaming that goes on in his courtroom is nothing compared to the shame he sees online. The justice system in the West has a lot of problems, says the judge, but at least there are rules. You have basic rights as the accused. You have your day in court. You don't have any rights when you're accused on the internet. This kind of digital permanence and the shame that comes with it can be devastating. The constant access to the past creates what Scott Small calls memory overload, where we're unable to filter out irrelevant or harmful information. He warns that this overload can, as it does with post-traumatic stress disorder patients, prevent both individuals and societies from moving forward. Victor Mayer-Schönberger,
professor of internet governance, Oxford University,
agrees with Small's thoughts about the downsides of memory overload.
The unfortunate element of human remembering is that because our brain forgets automatically, we never had to deal with deliberate forgetting. We can't deliberately forget. If I tell you, please forget that my second name is Michael, you will remember that. Yeah. It's the exact opposite. And so the problem is we don't know how to disregard memories of our past. We don't know how to forgive if we remember. And so as we become a remembering society, we become an unforgiving society.
Victor thinks that if we had to make a choice between the two, we should practice forgetting more than remembering, especially when it comes to our own faults.
I'm not in favor of annihilating memories. I'm in favor of putting them in the shoebox and stashing them in the attic. So that if you really want to make the effort to go up there, you can take them down, you can read them. Pour yourself a glass of wine and go through them. But you don't stumble over them every day.
In other words, if someone really wanted to find dirt on you, they could. But they would have to make an effort for it and dig through police records or other kinds of archives. Making our worst actions easily accessible doesn't seem to be helpful for creating a forgiving society. So, how do we balance the need to remember with the benefits of forgetting? Let's look at 4 possible solutions. One approach is to review requests individually on a case-by-case basis, as Cleveland.com does. Their editorial team considers factors like the age of the information, the context, and whether the person has shown they've moved on. For example, a story about a minor arrest from 15 years ago might no longer serve the public interest and could be removed from search engine results. However, this approach is labor-intensive and subjective, leaving room for inconsistency. Another idea is called digital decay, where online information fades over time, similar to how human memory works. For example, after a certain number of years, old articles or posts could become harder to find or automatically archived. This would allow people's digital identities to evolve without being permanently tied to their past. While promising, this approach would require significant changes and regulations to how search engines and online platforms store and display information. Remember, currently in the United States, social media companies have greater protection under the law than their users, especially when it comes to privacy protections. A third approach focuses on adding context to online records. For example, search results could indicate whether someone was arrested but not convicted, or include information about how much time has passed since the incident. Additionally, some news organizations, such as the Associated Press, have decided that they will no longer run the names of people charged with minor crimes, out of concern that such stories can have a long, damaging afterlife on the internet that can make it hard for individuals to move on with their lives. This could help reduce misunderstanding and give people a more fair chance to explain their histories. Finally, we need to rethink how we use shame in the digital age. People are more than their worst moments. Deborah Dwyer, a former journalist and now researcher who studies unpublishing practices in newsrooms, argues that there is no going back from permanent memory in our digital age.
Right. Well, if we think the answer to this is to find a way to unpublish everything that somehow we collectively think ought to be unpublished, that is a pipe dream. We're never going to be able to eradicate our past. That day, that ship has sailed. But the power that we give an arrest report from 10 years ago on a minor offense that some silly child did, and they're now grown up and responsible and attempting to get into law school, people actually have the power to determine how important that is, right? How much weight do we give that? Part of this is us shifting our perspectives. There's never going to be a perfect way to clean up everyone's past. That is, we've got to learn to live with it. And if we can decide maybe that we ought to address it with a little bit of compassion, that gives me hope.
The only thing left to me now is my daughter. I forgive you.
What Dwyer is hopeful for is that we will see our own mistakes when we come across others' mistakes. Encouraging empathy and forgiveness might help create a culture where we balance accountability with second chances. The right to be forgotten isn't just about deleting search results, it's about how we balance privacy, accountability, and collective memory. Programs like Cleveland.com's Right to Be Forgotten highlight the tension between giving people a fresh start and maintaining public access to important information. We also learn that forgetting is essential for growth and for healing. But as Jon Ronson's stories of public shaming show, the internet's permanence can make it difficult to move on from our mistakes. The challenge is finding a middle ground, one that respects both individual dignity and public knowledge. As Cleveland.com's editor reminds his staff,
Well, but remember, get back to our central question. Is the value of having his name there greater than the pain it's causing him for being there?
does the public's need to know outweigh the harm to the individual in the story? Remember Justine Sacco, the woman who was publicly fired because of a tasteless social media post before she boarded a flight? 4 years after her public shaming fiasco, Sacco was hired as director of communications at the very same parent company that fired her. When he rehired her, her new boss stated, "With one notable exception, Justine's track record speaks for itself. Very few people in the business world have Justine's indomitable spirit, tenacity, and drive to persevere. That's the kind of talent we seek." Maybe enough time had passed to where the public's memory of Sacco's social media post had decayed. Maybe her employer experienced a moment of compassion and saw Sacco's mistake as an isolated incident in an otherwise successful career. As we move forward, we should all continue to ask ourselves how much we want to remember and what we're willing to forget. The Right to Be Forgotten forces us to think about how much knowledge we want to know about one another and how easy that knowledge should be to access.